So thanks for a wonderful paper and comment. And now we open for questions. We already have a rather long list. Would you like to first respond, or yeah, before it ended, I've already collected several numerous. Okay, so all right, more. Do you want to respond?
I just want to say thank you, Irene. That was brilliant, and I think so brilliant, and I think brings into view this really this political, I think this necessary political dimension to what's happening in the film, what I'm trying to do, and so I very grateful, and I would just add that again, one of the experts that he consults, I mean, for people who've seen the film, you might recall it, but he goes to someone who is an expert in like Holocaust denial, and sort of tries to say, why, what would have motivated my grandparents to basically that this expert says, well, you were, probably the driving force behind this relationship was not the von Mildensteins, but your own grandparents, that they somehow needed this to prop up their sense of Germanness, or to kind of keep it going in some way, which I think also which your point sort of amplifies, but makes more political, I think, and in addition to being cultural, right? I think that political element is so critical. So thank you.
Great. Okay, so we'll collect several together. So firstly, Aura and Rui. I'll just say who was written. I also have Yael, Andreas, Levi, Ayelet, and Nan. Did you? Yeah, no?
No, not
okay. Okay, so David.
Okay, Ravit, I wanted to push you more on the law and literature here, and to suggest another way to look at it. You took it through the property, but I thought what was missing in your is the Kastner trial. Because it's really, from how I read it, it's really a contrast to what the criminal track does with and the question here is collaboration, Jewish, German, Jewish Nazi collaboration, and so by contrasting these two, the film, The Flat, and Kastner, you see. What happens in the social as opposed to and the ability to deal with. I was reminded of Andreas' paper on fraternization. This really biggest taboo, I think, in Israel, which is the ongoing social relationship between Jews and Nazi collaborators. For example, with Kastner, we know there was another film about the ongoing relationship between Kastner's family and Kurt Becher in Germany, which are very, very similar to what you see here. And this question of the political borders and the social taboo, that you cannot really discuss this. And I want to push you more on this direction, on how the film allows us to think about collaboration, both its moral negative and its social aspects, which the property line doesn't allow you to really access. So I call you to reflect on it. And this, of course, leads to Arendt and Heidegger in a different realm, but that's exactly it.
So actually what I have to say is kind of in some ways redundant after Irene's comment, especially the first part. But I'll say it anyway because in a sort of reductive way, which is that there's I think there's a distinction between stuff and property, and in the sense that property is almost like. Well, it's almost like money in the sense that it can't be what you describe as the stuff that there's too much of, because it only takes on its meaning and its value by having scarcity. And whereas there's all this stuff that is also, in a sense, property, but a different sense, right? That can be, and that is in excess, and that also has other meaning. But that may be really the line between the two different kinds of meaning that you're. And it's so you practically say that. Irene said it, I think, explicitly. I think if you were to make it more explicit in the paper, there would be sort of a sharper wedge there.
Oh, no, I thought Paula. Okay.
Okay, so thank you. Viola, I think think you're absolutely right, and I think that there's certainly, much more that I can say about collaboration, and I'm kind of, as you can see, I'm sort of resisting it in some measure because it would be an entirely different argument, but I'm open to it and I like it. And I do think that it is. This is why I kind of close with the Arendt passage that I do, because it's because I think there is a lot to be done also with the sort of tension or the distinction between friendship and collaboration, and I think you're suggesting as much. So I think that's really actually.
In a way, when he interrogates them,
yes,
he removes the blame from his parents. He removes the question of what did you do to whether he was a Nazi or not. So it's a very and you see this move in the trials from Kastner to Eichmann and all.
Yes.
So I think it's really there.
Yeah.
Just
No, that's I think you're absolutely right. I mean, the nature of the friendship has only really to do with whether or not, with how much of a Nazi he is, right? I mean, that's right, and so I think it does become the kind of, a way, in a way it's almost more comfortable to talk about this as a collaboration, right, as you're intimating, than as a friendship, and my own intuition about this is that was probably the reality for someone like the Tuchlers and the von Mildensteins themselves, right? These weren't people who said a German and a Jew and friends, right? That's not that's my projection of what I would imagine that to be like, right? But that there are levels of denial or level, on every level, but that in this case it takes the kind of shape of being more comfortable talking about collaboration than about friendship.
But then you see that the flat remains Berlin, so you see an enclave.
So,
We'll talk
which goes back to this point about
keep-
Okay,
sorry.
sorry.
Keep moving.
Yeah, no, and Roy, I think you're absolutely right. I've thought a lot without articulating very well the difference between stuff and property. In part because I think that line sometimes is so slippery, right? Because at some point, stuff becomes property sometimes. By this is why the mother is sorting so meticulously through things in the flat, right? Because she's, it's all this stuff and she has no idea what she really wants to keep. She discards a lot of it, but sometimes a meaningless object somehow in this weird moment that you can't quite calibrate becomes something that you just can't let go of, So, but I think that this is an important thing to try to sharpen here.
Okay, so we'll now gather a few more. Yael, Andreas, Livy, and Ayele, and then we'll move to the second.
I'm Yael. I'm PhD candidate here in Tel Aviv, guided by Liora. I wanted to talk about property and about inheritance. You combine these two, obviously linked concepts, but I want to separate them for a moment. First of all, regarding property, I agree and disagree with Ro'i because I think that the property, let's say the home, especially the home, is very meaningful. It's not just property. It's not just something which is scarce, or something. And I think that legal works of Margaret Radin and of Carol Rose would be very helpful here because they talk about the personality aspects of property, and I think that the act of emptying the house, they touch the books and the furniture and the things, and they see it, they smell it. And I think it's a vivid example of the connection between property and the personhood, and I think this would be very helpful. And the home specifically, it's the fortress, it's the anchor. It's not just an object, just a property. Regarding inheritance, which I'm less familiar with it, but I can refer you to works of Daphne Hacker from this faculty. She wrote about the meaning of inheritance, the social meaning of inheritance in the familial context, but I think this would be helpful as well. And Shelley Kreitzer from Ramat Gan wrote about intergenerational justice, and she wrote on the home specifically. So I think their work would be very useful for you.
So I'm sure that in your, first of all, thank you. It was really, really beautiful. House Ends is my favorite Forster book. And I can see how well the first quote goes with what you're trying to do with property. And I'm sure in your larger property project, you're probably dealing with that as well. But I wonder why. So the problem I'm having with this particular way of looking at property is that it emphasizes a continuum. It is all about a continuity and an affective continuity over already established links. So it's kind of an extension of a Levinasian ethics of intimacy and proximity, and what I think what it fails to accommodate is first the rupture the property brings. That is, a property is something that is essentially a very conservative way of organizing society. It constructs belonging, which means excluding. It constructs strong family ties, which means impoverished others who don't have access to land. You know, the usual kind of critique of property. So first is this, and second is the other rupture that I was looking for, and that would be, you kind of introduced that with a letter, or the idea of sort of finding the letter or not knowing how it is. So the rupture inside which bridges the opposite sides, let's say, or the sides that cannot be linked by property, where property actually alienates. So then the discussion about objects and things, I think, is very good and quite relevant to the point that we look at it phenomenologically. But I think that's also the problem, and the same thing with property. So Brown and the kind of standard understanding of things as objects, the movement between a kind of a sentimental investment like home, etc., is what emphasizes this continuity. And I wonder whether there is a possibility of looking at property pretty much in, I don't know whether you're familiar with object-oriented ontology, the famous OOO stuff and all that thing that's happening now. So the kind of understanding of object-oriented ontologies as the objects that are not, they do not take value because of their connection to whatever it is, to the kind of familiar property understanding of it. They do not take value because they belong, but they are valuable because they construct affective relationships as such. So do you see what I'm, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ravit. You chose in your paper to focus on the tangible, and you even asked at the beginning of the paper, why is this focus on property? And of course, the movie itself has two important documents, two tangible objects: the clipping at the beginning, and then the CV of von Mittelstein at the end, kind of bracketing the issue, the film, and with this tangible evidence. And I think you hinted at it that the tangible is it's the search for a replacement for survivors, and I just wanted to suggest that that it's even bigger than that, because the documentary itself, and you hinted at it today when you said it's actually a documentary. So Goldfinger is trying to provide a tangible memorial with the documentary. So that's really a third link in that chain from the clipping to the CV to the documentary. And it maybe is part of even a broader move that we're seeing with new memorials that in the last 10, 15 years have sprung up. I'm thinking of the memorial, the Holocaust memorial in Berlin, the memorial along the Danube in Budapest. in Poland, significantly at the site of Belzec. There's a new memorial, which was a real surprise that they built a memorial. It was very controversial. Where suddenly they're building a memorial. Why are they suddenly building a memorial now? This need for something, a tangible site, and now, as we speak, the new memorial or the museum. It's actually a museum that Moshe Rossman's written about in Warsaw. So, which is a funny. It's a strange turn that suddenly we're seeing a new need for tangible memorials connected to the survivors that are passing away.
Thank you, Ravit, for a beautiful talk after a beautiful paper. So I want to go back to the property, and I want to, I think, a little disagree with Roy, because I think that while the economic value of property is built on scarcity, the excess is in its meaning, right? So property always means more than it actually is. So the excess is in the meaning. And that relates me to something that I was thinking when I read this, especially, strangely or not, in conjunction with Christine Kruger's paper, which is the idea of property as an archive, right? So, and I think that this is what happens here, that it's interesting to think of an archive is also always in excess, and we also, right, so she was talking about the Public Records Act or something, and they were like, how do you account for all of this, right? Do you do it alphabetically? Do you do it through a calendar, right? The inability to catalog, or the need to catalog in one way and therefore exclude other ways, I think is also a way for to think about property, right? How can we account for it? And we need to account for it in all kinds of different ways. And it becomes an archive where the actual things, objects, you can count them, but they are unaccountable in all their meanings. And therefore, being able to arrange them or to think about them becomes, as a whole, or to account for all of them, becomes the impossibility.
Try to answer that, and then we'll have a second round. So
okay.
Third round.
So I'll try to be as quick as possible. Mainly, first of all, just to I think all these comments actually are very helpful. So I can in a way just sort of say that and go. But I will. But I actually. So first of all, yeah, thank you. And I I would certainly say that Carol Rose and Peggy Radin's work is not far from my mind when I'm thinking about this, and in the larger work on property that this is coming into. So I think that's very helpful, and similarly with Hakan and Kaiser, I think it's in other parts, and I absolutely agree with you about the kind of tactile or sensorial dimension to this that I think some of this the film just can't show, right? And I think that's also part of the limits of the form that I think are necessary to talk about, frankly. So thank you for that. Andreas, I agree with you about the sort of problem of of continuity or the continuum. Although I would also say that I think that the exclusion, right, is precisely, I think, what this film is about in many ways, right? Or rather, this idea that, in fact, it sort of tries to push back about that. This idea that but this is naturally about the continuity of our own family, right? And that this thing that's actually quite valueless, right? That isn't sort of a piece of precious property, but that's something that is precisely disruptive, and isn't property in the sort of strict sense, but also a document, right? It actually treads the line between just being a piece of documentary evidence, right? And at what point is that property? And part of what I'm thinking about in terms of what it means for that to count as property is for one to have to go through a process of inheritance that is precisely a process of rupture, right? That you just think, okay, I'm inheriting this apartment, and it'll just be continuum, and I'll just sort of absorb it. It's painful, it's sad, I'll mourn, and I'll go on. And it's not what happens. So I kind of actually think that what you're saying, maybe I haven't said it very clearly, is what I'm trying to say, yes. Levi, I think you're absolutely right about the relationship between what a documentary tries to do and what a memorial tries to do. Also because the documentary doesn't really provide you with a fast answer, and neither does a memorial, right? One doesn't really know what one's supposed to feel when one visits a memorial or a monument. And I think that unspeakability or kind of directionless part of it is critical to what it means and what it represents. Ayelet, I think the archive is so helpful to me in conceptualizing this in a different way, right? This kind of relationship between counting and unaccountability that I think needs to be kept in play and kind of fine-tuned.
Okay, so now we have the final round. Please be very, very brief because we have, okay, so David, Asaf, Stephen, Chris, and Anat. Anat maybe, oh, I thought Nan you gave up.
Nan gave up. Nan is pouting. Nan is making a pouting face.
I said and then he said no.
He just moves her up to the front of the queue.
Oh.
Look at her pout, Ishai.
So Nan, of course, is in. Anat, you will have to give up your position. Okay.
Anat, we will talk. Yeah.
So David, and please, very, very briefly.
No, yeah, we'll talk. Yeah.
Yeah, but
it's right there.
The mic. Ayelet.
Yeah, so two things. Just one very short comment. We had historian Jan Gross here a couple of years ago in the what do you call it, the workshop, talking about how property was completely central to the way Poles maltreated Jews during the war. So you might just want to have a look at that. And another one, this is more of a very unfinished thought, but I can't resist it just because the things you were saying were very associated with things from property theory, which I used to read. And so the way you're using property is sort of antithetical to the way I think most property lawyers use it. And that you're using it in the sense of things or stuff or whatever. And most property lawyers would say property is human relations between people, about illegal relations between people about things. And so for property lawyers, it's almost unintelligible to say too much property, and except for in the following sense, which has nothing to do with what you're talking about, but yet it sounds similar. There is this whole stream of economic analysis of property, which talks about having too many kinds of property rights. Sometimes goes under the heading of the numerus clausus principle. Sorry, you should have telling me too much time. So you might just want to have a look at that literature and might just have some associative help for what the kinds of things you're doing.
I think this is a footnote to your paper in one sense, but it also talks about there's a tension between the universal and particular notions of property, and what's missing is there are various ways in which property passes in different cultures upon death. And sometimes it passes, and sometimes it's destroyed or, taken by the dead person to another world. So, and I think it actually there's an angle to the film that is missing in your paper. This is kind of an Anglo-American discussion of property in your paper, but actually I think a theme in the film is the Zionist conception of property, or at least European property. So what happens is that basically the family throws the German stuff because that's what the Zionists did with the European past. Now they threw it away. And a major theme in Israeli culture is the rediscovery of the Jewish past and Jewish diaspora. So this is actually, it's a Zionist film. You have to read it in the cultural context of Israeli culture in the last... Nobody's going to. Yeah, so what's missing here, okay. So that...
Okay, very brief. I wonder if Foster is in your paper in counterpoint to Winnicott, who's not in your paper. So Foster talks about inheritance, which is the transmission of property from person to person. Winnicott talks about transitional objects, which is how property passes people from place to place. And these are transitional objects for Goethe. And I'm wondering if, in fact, the counterpoint to this film, which is the transitional object story, it can be seen in Edmund de Waal's book, The Hare with Amber Eyes, which is about the Nitsuki, which serve as transitional objects for a Viennese Jewish family.
Chris?
I'm not sure if I should talk, actually, because I clearly read this paper completely differently than everybody else. I didn't think it was really about property at all. It seemed to me that it was really about I thought this was this seemed to me to be about sort of evasion and absence and frustration and emptiness. I mean, I love the stuff that's in the paper is great. It's got all of my favorite things. It's got sort of piles of stuff, and it reminds me of Sebald, for example. It reminds me, obviously, everything reminds me of Benjamin. So this is a great paper for someone interested in Benjamin. But I just, there seems to be this sort of emptiness at the center of the paper that everything is revolving around, and it seems to me that the emptiness is sort of an idea of justice. And I'm kind of curious to know whether that's the case, and if so, why? Because I've kind of pretty much given up on thinking justice is useful for anything as a concept. I mean, it seems to me to be a permanently deferrable concept, and what's interesting about it is that it's permanently deferrable, and so it's better to think about something else instead. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Seriously? Okay, I'm gonna be so short that Anna can also say. I was just, so I sort of thought the same thing as Chris, except that I thought it was about secrets, and I wonder whether the literature on secrecy wouldn't be incredibly helpful, and it would allow you also to use a lot of the stuff that's come out about memoirs of people talking about finding out that their that their fathers had entirely parallel lives, that they had a whole other family, or or that their happily married parents were okay. I'm done now. Okay.
Okay. Well, you have 1 minute.
Okay.
He's scary.
I would say in 1 minute, this is all very helpful. Thank you. David, thank you. And tell me what to read. I will read it. Asaf, I think that you're right. This is the film that is Zionist, and I think also resisting the terms of its Zionism, right? Because he's the one. I mean, he's the one himself who wants to reclaim it. So he's the resistant, but I think he's. It plays out in that tension. I absolutely agree. Steve Winnicott is absolutely on my mind when I'm working on this, and I think that maybe should be in the paper, but he's elsewhere in the project for sure in terms of a transitional object. I care very much about Winnicott. So yeah, but thank you for bringing me back to that. Chris, yours is a kind of harder question because I would say at the heart of my paper, I actually don't care about justice in this paper. So I was sort of both worried that that's what you found at its heart, right? No, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's, that certainly wasn't my intent. But if that is, if that's what's coming across, then I have to rethink the way I'm coming at it. But I do think that there's a kind of emptiness at the center, absolutely, because this is not. Because the work I'm looking at isn't one that particularly has a resolution, right? So it has to contain that, and I care about retaining some of that, right, and not having an answer. And I think this is why, perhaps this, secrecy is a way to go. Although I think that would end up producing something very different. But I also think it's, I do also think that families house and harbor secrets, right? And that becomes a kind of both a property of the family in terms of a character of the family, but also something that the family believes it possesses and doesn't want to relinquish at all costs. So thank you so much. Sorry about the overtime.
Thank you so much.